Jake, after 17 years, we're eliminating your position. The words landed like a dull hammer, not a sharp knife. My boss, Daniel, said them flatly, almost rehearsed. Vanessa from HR sat beside him, hands folded neatly, her expression carefully blank, as if empathy might violate company policy. I nodded once. Not because I accepted it, but because after nearly 2 decades in that building, I could read the room before Daniel even opened his mouth. The air had shifted weeks ago, colder, thinner. I'd felt it in missed emails, unreturned calls, and in the way younger analysts avoided eye contact in the hallway. I understand completely, I said. My voice was calm, level. No anger. No pleading. Just quiet acknowledgement. Daniel blinked, almost disappointed I wasn't going to make it easy for him by breaking down. Clean out your desk by end of day. I stood, turned, and walked out. Back at my cubicle, a beige square of fabric and fluorescent light that had been mine longer than most marriages last, I began to pack. Not hurried, not sluggish. Methodical. A family photo of Andrea and Olivia on a beach trip. A mug my son had made back in high school, its glaze cracked but still holding coffee. A small cactus that had somehow endured 17 years of recycled air. I placed each item in a cardboard box like evidence being tagged and bagged. Around me, screens flickered as coders pretended to work. They knew. Word travels faster than email in an office. Some risked a glance, then quickly looked back down, ashamed of their curiosity. Most of them were kids I'd trained, good kids, sharp with code but blind to the deeper veins of the system. They thought they understood the architecture, but they didn't. They'd never dug into the buried roots, the custom frameworks I had built layer upon layer over the years. Bethany from marketing appeared, her heels clicking nervously on the tile. Jake, I just heard. This is ridiculous. You practically built this place. I shrugged, kept packing. Companies change direction. Without any warning. After everything you've done, her voice began to rise, emotion breaking through the professional gloss. Heads turned. It's fine, I cut her off gently. My voice was quiet but firm. Really? It wasn't fine. But I wasn't going to give Daniel and Vanessa the satisfaction of watching me make a scene. When I was finished, I slid my old security badge across the desk. 16 renewals, each one a silent acknowledgement that I was still necessary. Now useless plastic. As I carried the box out, Daniel stepped from his office. He didn't shake my hand, didn't say goodbye. He just stood there, watching me leave, like a prison guard making sure an inmate didn't take anything on his way out. That stung more than the words had. Not the firing, no, the surveillance. As if I'd never been more than a liability. Outside, I paused in the parking lot, staring up at the 12-story building where I'd spent most of my adult life. I'd been here since it was 2 floors in a rented business park, since Olivia was in kindergarten. Now she was finishing grad school. I'd given this place more than I'd ever admit out loud. Weekends, holidays, nights when Andrea fell asleep alone while I recovered crashed systems or tracked down lost data. I set the box gently in the trunk of my car, sat behind the wheel, and just stayed. The security badge was gone. The title, gone. The respect, gone. But they had overlooked one detail. Over 17 years, I hadn't just worked here, I had become the nervous system of Meridian Technologies. Every file, every credential, every forgotten backdoor into the architecture had passed through me. Not because I was exceptional, but because I was thorough. Because while they buzzed about future-proofing and digital transformation, I was the one documenting everything, securing everything, and keeping records no one else bothered to notice. They thought they were done with me. I started the engine, pulled out of the lot, and merged into traffic. The box rattled softly in the back seat. My hands were steady on the wheel, my face calm in the rearview mirror. But inside, something colder was taking shape. Wednesday would be fun. The first night after Meridian cut me loose, I didn't sleep. The silence of the house pressed in around me like insulation. No alarm clock to set, no project deadline waiting in my inbox, no blinking red light on my office phone begging for a response at 2 a.m. I sat on the porch with a beer, staring at the neighborhood I'd lived in for 20 years. Andrea came out, barefoot, her hair tied back. She leaned against the rail beside me without a word. After 19 years of marriage, She didn't need to ask. She could read the tension in my shoulders, the way I gripped the bottle too tightly. Finally, she said, "You've been with them almost half your life. And they just ended it in a 5-minute meeting." I exhaled through my nose. That's how the world works now. Loyalty's just a punchline in a corporate seminar. Her hand brushed mine. "Jake, you turned down other offers. You stayed because you believed in them." She was right. Years ago, competitors had approached me, waving signing bonuses and executive titles. But I had chosen to stay at Meridian because it felt like building something. Watching it grow from 2 rented floors to a glass tower downtown. Watching my systems evolve with every acquisition, every upgrade. I told myself it was loyalty. Andrea used to joke that the servers were my second family. She wasn't entirely wrong. But corporations don't have families. They have assets and liabilities. Yesterday, I'd been reclassified. The thing is, what Daniel, Vanessa, and their new consultant didn't understand is that Meridian wasn't just a job to me. It was a map of my life. Every new server rack reminded me of the year Olivia started middle school. Every major upgrade tied to the Christmas bonus I used to buy her first car. I'd built redundancy protocols while Andrea recovered from surgery. I'd written custom code during snowstorms when the whole city shut down, but the systems couldn't afford to. Meridian had been the backdrop of my adulthood. And now it was gone, just like that. Daniel had only been my boss for 5 years. MBA fresh out of grad school, polished smile, sharp suits. He spoke in buzzwords: streamline efficiency, future-proofing, digital transformation. Words that sounded visionary but usually meant one thing: doing more with less. To him, I wasn't Jake, the man who kept his company alive through 3 acquisitions. I was IT resources. A replaceable part. At first, I'd tried to bridge the gap. I'd sat with him, explained the complexity of our systems, the history buried under 2 decades of rushed growth and patchwork fixes. But Daniel didn't want to understand. He wanted numbers on a slide deck, progress bars, graphs. And when the graphs didn't bend fast enough, he brought in someone who could make them bend. Jason Phillips. I'll never forget the first time I saw him. Expensive suit, Rolex that caught the light like a mirror, handshake firm enough to crack knuckles. His Stanford degree sat at the top of his LinkedIn profile like a crown jewel. He talked the way consultants do, smooth, quick, full of metaphors about unclogging bottlenecks and streamlining the flow of innovation. To Daniel, Jason was everything I wasn't. Young, glossy, marketable. The 2 of them started holding private meetings in glass-walled conference rooms, voices lowered when I walked by. Then came the subtle changes. Permissions quietly modified. Admin controls shifted. At first, nothing obvious, just little locks appearing where I'd always had keys. I could have protested. Could have raised alarms. But instead, I waited. Watched. Documented. That's what I do. I observe the systems no one else pays attention to. One night, as Andrea and I sat on the porch again, she asked, "You seem distracted lately. Is everything okay at work?" I told her the truth I'd always told myself. It's just changes. Nothing I haven't seen before. But it wasn't the same. This wasn't the normal turbulence of tech, new software, new leadership, new strategies. This felt different. A slow, deliberate sidelining. My access, my responsibilities, my authority, they were being cut away one by one. Then I found the memo. It wasn't sent to me, of course. I stumbled on it while reviewing system updates. A company-wide restructuring plan, complete with a shiny new org chart. Jason Phillips, newly minted head of IT strategy. My position. Absent. Erased as if it had never existed. That same week, during a routine scan, one of those quiet, background tasks no one else even thought about, I found something else. Strange transfers buried in the financial software. Regular payments to a vendor I didn't recognize. Apex Solutions Group. The amounts were small at first, but growing steadily each month. A quick search told me everything I needed to know. The business address was a UPS store. The trap was obvious now. My termination wasn't about efficiency or modernization. It was about erasing the one man who knew the bones of the system well enough to see what they were hiding. They thought I was gone. They thought wrong. I had run thousands of security scans in my career. Most were routine, like checking your locks at night when you already know they're bolted. But that Tuesday evening, just days before the meeting that ended my career, the scan picked up something I couldn't ignore. Unusual patterns in our financial software. Small anomalies, but consistent. Transfers labeled as legitimate vendor payments, though the vendor name, Apex Solutions Group, meant nothing to me. Curious, I dug deeper. The payments were neat, almost too neat. Just under thresholds that would normally trigger secondary approvals. At first, it looked like noise, but when I lined them up against license renewals for our enterprise software, the pattern jumped out. The amounts were inflated, sometimes by 15%, sometimes by 20%. Always just enough to go unnoticed, always enough to accumulate into real money over time. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen as the realization sank in. This wasn't a clerical error. This was deliberate. I ran a quick check on Apex Solutions Group. The business address was a UPS store in Dublin, Ohio. A red flag so bright it could be seen from space. That's when the chill hit me. I wasn't just looking at sloppy bookkeeping. I was looking at theft. And not by amateurs. Someone on the inside was siphoning money, laundering it through a shell company disguised as a vendor. I traced the approvals. The authorization trail led straight to the office of Brian Wilcox, our CFO. Every payment, every inflated invoice, rubber-stamped by him. I didn't stop there. I checked the company registration for Apex. The listed owner, Thomas Wilcox, Brian's brother-in-law. For a long moment, I sat there in the glow of the monitor, my pulse steady but my mind racing. Brian Wilcox. The man who had shaken my hand at company parties, who'd joked about golf and scotch. The man who once told me, "Jake, if this place ever loses you, we're all screwed." And now I was staring at the proof that he was gutting the company from the inside out. And then the other shoe dropped. The restructuring memo. My erased position. The permissions stripped away, one by one. It wasn't coincidence. It wasn't digital transformation. It was a cover-up. They hadn't fired me because I was obsolete. They'd fired me because I was dangerous. I remembered Daniel watching me pack my desk, standing in the hallway with that unreadable expression. He hadn't been guarding company property. He'd been making sure the problem, me, was walking out of the building quietly. The humiliation of that moment burned hotter now, sharper. It wasn't just betrayal. It was calculated removal. I thought back to the countless nights I'd stayed in the server room, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, breathing recycled air while Andrea slept alone at home. I thought of Olivia's school recitals I'd missed because some executive's email crashed and I was the only one who knew how to fix it. I thought of the loyalty I'd given, year after year, as though Meridian was more than just a company, as though it was a family. And this was how they repaid me. By discarding me like an old cable and hoping I wouldn't notice that the walls were rotting from within. I copied the records onto a secure drive. Not just the Apex transfers, everything. Meeting minutes. Access logs. Internal emails. Years of digital breadcrumbs, enough to trace every shadowy move they thought no one would see. I locked the drive in my desk at home. For now. When Andrea brought me coffee the next morning, she noticed the tightness in my jaw. "Rough night?" she asked softly. "Just thinking," I said. But inside, it wasn't thinking anymore. It was planning. For 17 years, I'd solved problems. Fixed systems. Recovered data others thought was lost forever. I'd been the invisible presence keeping Meridian alive. Now, I wasn't going to fix their system. I was going to dismantle it. Piece by piece. The days after my termination passed in a haze. Morning routines that once revolved around email alerts and conference calls became empty rituals. No more frantic messages from department heads. No more servers demanding attention at ungodly hours. Just silence. It should have felt like relief. Instead, it felt like exile. Andrea tried to keep the house warm with normalcy. She made pancakes in the mornings, asked about job prospects, suggested maybe this was an opportunity to slow down, breathe. I nodded, Gave her the half-smile husbands give when they don't want their wives to worry. But she could sense it, the way my eyes drifted, the way I paced the house like a man locked inside his own skin. Every evening, I found myself in the garage. The smell of motor oil and old wood, the hum of the fluorescent light above. I cleared a space on my workbench, laid out the secure drive, and stared at it like a loaded gun. On that drive sat years of secrets. Not just the apex fraud, though that alone was enough to bury half the executive wing, but contracts, financial trails, compliance failures no regulator had ever been meant to see. I knew where everybody was buried because, more often than not, I was the one who dug the holes. At first, I told myself I was just holding on to it. Insurance. Protection in case someone came after me. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. This wasn't about survival anymore. This was about justice. Late at night, when Andrea was asleep and Olivia was back at her apartment, I'd sit at my desk with a glass of whiskey and a pad of paper. No computers, not yet. Too easy to trace. Just pen, paper, and silence. I started mapping them out. Daniel Reeves, the CEO. Young, ambitious, willing to sell out anyone for optics. The puppet who thought he was the puppeteer. Brian Wilcox, the CFO. Greedy, careful, but not careful enough. The architect of Apex. Jason Phillips, the consultant. The smiling shark brought in to displace me, grease the wheels, make the fraud efficient. Vanessa Cole, head of HR. The enforcer. The one who signed the paperwork, making the execution clean and official. 4 names. For pillars holding up the corruption that had bled the company dry. I underlined them. 1 stroke for each. Andrea would sometimes find me there, scribbling in the half-light. She'd lean against the doorway, watching quietly. "You're not really looking for jobs, are you?" she asked one night. I didn't answer right away. "I will," I finally said. "When the time's right." She studied me, her eyes soft but searching. "Just don't lose yourself in this, Jake." I gave her another one of those half-smiles. But in my chest, I knew the truth. I wasn't lost. For the first time in years, I was found. The company thought they'd taken everything from me. Stripped me of power, title, relevance. But they'd overlooked one thing. Knowledge. And knowledge is the kind of power you don't put on an org chart. I had their secrets. I knew their systems better than they did. And if they wanted me gone, invisible, erased, then I'd become a ghost in their machine. Watching. Waiting. Pulling threads until the whole tapestry unraveled. The aftermath wasn't quiet anymore. It was the calm before a storm. And I was the storm. Revenge isn't loud at the start. It's quiet. Careful. Surgical. My first move wasn't to expose them. Not yet. That would be too easy, too quick. A press leak, and sec tip, a police report, it would make headlines for a week, and then what? Daniel and Jason would claim ignorance, Brian would take the fall, and Vanessa would draft some PR-laced severance agreement that let everyone else walk away rich. No. If I was going to burn them down, it had to be from the inside out. Slow enough that they wouldn't see the fire until it was crawling up their legs. So I started with the systems. Even after termination, I still had footprints in Meridian's network. They'd revoked my official credentials, but a company that size, with legacy code stacked like sedimentary rock, never truly scrubs itself clean. Over the years, I'd built backdoors, quiet little maintenance tunnels no one else knew existed. They were meant for emergencies, for the nights when something crashed and I couldn't afford to wait on bureaucratic approval. Now, those tunnels were mine alone. I slipped back into their servers like a ghost returning to its old house. No alarms, no alerts. Jason had probably bragged about locking down vulnerabilities in some board meeting, but I could see his fingerprints all over the firewall changes. Glossy. Superficial. He'd plastered over cracks with shiny new code, never realizing that the foundation was still rotting. From my laptop in the garage, I moved carefully. Observed. Logged activity without altering it. I wasn't here to crash their system. Not yet. I was here to listen. Within a week, I had what I needed, confirmation. Apex Solutions Group wasn't just siphoning money. It had metastasized. Wilcox had built a network of shells, half a dozen fake vendors, all feeding off Meridian like leeches. And Daniel. He wasn't ignorant. He was signing the contracts. His digital signature sat at the bottom of every deal, like a king blessing the theft of his own kingdom. Jason's role was clear, too. He was the architect of obfuscation. He'd designed the approval workflows, the payment schedules, the financial dashboards that disguised fraud as progress. Sleek graphs for the board, while the rot spread behind them. And Vanessa. She wasn't just pushing paper. She was managing the silence. Terminating anyone who asked too many questions. Offering restructuring packages to employees who got too close to the truth. I saw her emails. The patterns were unmistakable. They weren't just corrupt. They were complicit. All 4 of them. That night, as Andrea slept, I sat in the glow of the monitor and felt something I hadn't felt in months. Control. But control wasn't enough. I wanted them to feel it, the confusion, the paranoia, the helplessness they'd forced on me. So I left my first message. Nothing obvious. Just a ghostly whisper in the system. A line of code buried deep in the HR portal. When Vanessa logged in the next morning, she'd see the usual dashboards, the usual employee metrics. But when she scrolled down, one field would catch her eye. Status, observed. No crash. No breach. Just a word. Enough to make her heart skip, enough to send her scrambling to IT, enough to start the whispers. I could almost picture it, Jason brushing it off, Daniel frowning, Wilcox sweating just a little. They'd check the logs, run their scans, come up empty. Because I wasn't there. Not in the way they thought. I was everywhere else. And this was only the beginning. Vanessa was the first to crack. The morning after I left the word observed in her dashboard, she stormed into Daniel's office before 9 a.m., stilettos echoing like gunshots on the polished floor. I wasn't there, but I could see it all through the digital trail. Panicked logins, frantic searches, multiple password resets in under an hour. Her message to IT was sharp, clipped, "Something's wrong with my portal. I want a full system check immediately." Jason responded within minutes, his confidence bleeding through every keystroke. Glitch. Nothing serious. These old systems are full of legacy quirks. I'll patch it today. I smiled in the glow of my screen. Jason had no idea he was patching smoke, not fire. That week, I nudged the pressure higher. Tiny disruptions, each one small enough to be dismissed, but unsettling when stacked together. A payment batch to Apex flagged for duplicate invoice, only to clear itself the next day. An email thread between Daniel and Wilcox mysteriously reappearing after being deleted, as if the system itself had doubts. A dashboard metric on server uptime flashing red for 2 minutes at 3 a.m., then correcting itself before anyone could intervene. Individually, nothing damning. Collectively, a whisper campaign by the system itself. By Thursday, paranoia had a foothold. I watched Daniel's calendar fill with closed-door meetings. I watched Wilcox run multiple sweeps on his financial software, then delete the logs. Vanessa submitted another IT ticket, this time marked urgent. And Jason doubled down. He scheduled a company-wide update presentation, a performance designed to reassure the board that their digital transformation was secure, sleek, and unshakable. I knew his type. He'd walk into that conference room with his tailored suit and his buzzwords, clicking through slides of upward-trending arrows and glossy graphs. He'd sneer at the whispers, paint over the cracks with confidence. So I gave him a crack he couldn't paint over. The night before his presentation, I slipped into the system and altered exactly one slide in his deck. Just one. Nothing flashy. Nothing loud. The title of his first graph, Projected Cost Savings for the Quarter, flickered as he tested the slides. He wouldn't notice, not unless he stared too long. But when he launched the presentation in front of Daniel, Wilcox, Vanessa, and the board, the word would render differently. Not projected savings. Stolen gains. 2 words. That was all it would take. The board would see it. Vanessa would freeze. Wilcox would sweat. And Jason, standing there in his perfect suit, would lose the one thing he sold better than anything else, control. I leaned back in my chair that night, watching the cursor blink on the altered file. This wasn't sabotage. Not yet. This was theater. And the show was just getting started. Jason strutted into the boardroom Friday morning like a man about to sell the future. His navy suit was pressed, his silver tie pin gleaming. I could almost smell the cologne through the feed Stephen had quietly set up for me, a screen share trick I taught him months back for remote diagnostics. The boardroom was packed. Daniel leaned back in his chair, arms folded with that MBA smirk that said I hired this man, therefore his brilliance reflects on me. Wilcox sat rigid, a bead of sweat already forming at his temple despite the cool air. Vanessa clutched her notepad like a lifeline. Jason began smoothly. Ladies and gentlemen, Meridian Technologies is on the edge of a new era. Under my oversight, our systems are modernizing, agile, and cost-efficient. The first slide popped up. A neat, upward graph. Except not neat. Not clean. The boardroom went silent. Across the screen, in bold black letters, the title read, Stolen Gains. Jason froze. It lasted only a second, but in a room like that, a second stretched into eternity. Projected savings, he stammered, clicking forward too fast, fumbling for recovery. That was a formatting error. But the damage was done. The word had landed. Heavy. Unforgiving. Daniel's brow furrowed. He glanced at Wilcox. Vanessa's pen tapped nervously against the table. The board members, seasoned sharks in business suits, smelled blood in the water. Mr. Phillips, one of them interrupted, voice sharp, did you just say stolen gains? Care to elaborate? Jason's face flushed. He shook his head too quickly. Of course not. That was a typo. Nothing more. Strange typo, another board member muttered. Wilcox cleared his throat, trying to redirect. If I may, what Jason means is... But his voice cracked. His hands fidgeted. And that was when the second shoe dropped. Because while Jason scrambled with his slides, I triggered a subtle release. Nothing explosive, nothing obvious. Just a timed resurfacing of archived invoices, Apex Solutions Group, highlighted in yellow, lined up in Jason's very financial dashboard. He didn't see it, but the board did. Stephen had ensured the projector was linked directly to the live system, not Jason's doctored laptop copy. Excuse me, one of the finance committee members said sharply. Why are we looking at vendor payments to Apex Solutions? I don't recall approving these. The room shifted. Daniel's jaw tightened. Vanessa's face went pale. Wilcox's hand trembled as he reached for his water. Jason finally looked up and saw it, his perfect narrative shattered, replaced with evidence he didn't even know existed. This isn't part of my presentation, he stammered. Exactly. I pictured him standing there, drowning in the silence, every eye turning against him. For a man who built his reputation on certainty, this was worse than exposure. It was humiliation. The first collapse had begun. And I wasn't even in the room. Wilcox had always been the picture of composure. A CFO with a calm smile, a steady tone, a way of making numbers sound like inevitabilities. But when the board began questioning the Apex invoices, his mask started to crack. What exactly is Apex Solutions Group? One director asked, tapping his pen against the table with measured precision. I don't see them on our approved vendor list. Wilcox leaned forward, voice too fast, too practiced. They're a specialty consultancy, engaged for system licensing support. Nothing unusual. Industry standard. I could almost hear the strain behind those words. He hadn't had time to coordinate his story with Jason. Specialty consultancy, the finance chair repeated, eyes narrowing. Then why is the business address a UPS store in Dayton? The silence that followed was suffocating. Wilcox blinked, lips parting, but no words came out. Sweat beaded at his hairline. Vanessa shifted uncomfortably in her seat, scribbling notes she wouldn't dare read aloud. Daniel tried to intervene, his voice calm but strained. Let's not overreact. Mistakes happen in vendor registrations all the time. The important thing is the outcomes. But the board wasn't listening to him. All eyes were on Wilcox. He tugged at his tie, his polished facade fracturing. This isn't what it looks like. Apex was vetted. The payments are legitimate. But the numbers on the projector told another story. Inflated invoices. Repeated charges. Dates that lined up too neatly with his own approvals. One of the directors leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. Brian, you personally signed off on these, correct? The pause was fatal. Yes, Wilcox admitted finally, his voice a rasp. But only because I trusted the documentation provided. If there were irregularities, then I cut him off without being in the room. At that exact moment, I triggered another release. A single archived email slid into the projector feed like a ghost returning from the dead. It was addressed from Brian Wilcox to Daniel. Subject line, Apex Transfers, keep this between us. The room erupted. Brian, the chair said coldly, are you asking us to believe this was a clerical error when you explicitly instructed secrecy? Wilcox's face drained of color. His hands shook as he reached for his papers, but his voice betrayed him. That email is taken out of context. You don't understand. They understood perfectly. For 17 years I had watched men like him weaponize confidence and bureaucracy to silence the quiet ones. But numbers don't sweat. Data doesn't flinch. And right now, the data was eating him alive. Wilcox was cornered. And every twitch of his hand told the board he knew it. Vanessa had always thrived in controlled chaos. HR directors like her were trained in deflection, turn complaints into process, turn outrage into policy, turn problems into neatly labeled folders. She could smile while firing a single mother before Christmas, call it restructuring, and sleep that night without guilt. But now she was in the blast radius. The board's interrogation of Wilcox bled into her airspace. One of the directors turned sharply. Vanessa, you co-signed the severance paperwork for Mr. Wilson, didn't you? Her pen stopped mid-scribble. She looked up slowly. Yes. Standard protocol. And during that separation meeting, the director pressed, were you aware that Wilson had flagged financial irregularities? Vanessa's throat tightened. She smoothed her skirt, tried to summon her practiced calm. He made vague claims, yes. But without evidence. It seemed more like emotional reaction than fact. Yet, another director cut in, 2 days later, the very irregularities he hinted at are appearing on our screens. Did you investigate? Her voice wavered. I escalated to Daniel. It's not within our role to investigate financials. Wilcox, sweating and cornered, seized his chance to drag her down with him. Don't act innocent, Vanessa. You were in those meetings. You knew what Jake suspected. You warned us he'd cause trouble. The boardroom turned on her. Vanessa stammered, panic seeping into her carefully curated composure. I was following protocol. My responsibility is to protect the company from liability. At the time, I believed Mr. Wilson was a risk. Risk. That word hit me harder than I expected, sitting at my desk miles away. After 17 years of loyalty, sacrifice, and silence, that was how she'd framed me to the leadership, not an asset. A liability. A risk. Good. Let her choke on it. I decided to add fuel. At 10:17 a.m., another file surfaced on the projector, this one an internal HR memo, signed by Vanessa herself. Recommend immediate termination of J. Wilson prior to Q2 reporting. His access presents potential exposure if irregularities are discovered. Her face went white. Vanessa, the finance chair said coldly, you recommended terminating a 20-year employee, not for performance reasons, but to cover financial exposure. She shook her head frantically. That memo's out of context, it's. But her voice was cracking, panic bubbling to the surface. She'd spent her career managing optics, but now the optics were managing her. The woman who prided herself on being the calm in the storm had just become the storm. Daniel had been quiet through most of the storm. Too quiet. He sat at the head of the table with his arms folded, projecting that smug MBA calm, the kind that said, I'm above this. I'll manage the narrative. But the board wasn't buying it. Daniel, the chairwoman said at last, her tone sharp enough to slice the room in half, why did your department recommend Mr. Phillips? And why was Mr. Wilson, the only employee with legacy systems knowledge, excluded from modernization initiatives? Daniel leaned forward, his voice smooth. With respect, The IT department had stagnated under Jake Wilson. He was a good man, loyal, but resistant to change. Meridian needed new energy, fresh leadership. Jason brought that. His words rolled out like a corporate press release, sanitized, polished, hollow. But then one of the board members held up a printed email, freshly surfaced from the projector feed. An email from Daniel to Wilcox, dated 8 months earlier. Once Wilson is gone, Apex can scale without interference. Jason's on board. We'll handle HR through Vanessa. No obstacles after that. The silence that followed was nuclear. Daniel's mask slipped. His jaw tightened, his confident facade fracturing like glass under pressure. That, he stammered, that email is fabricated. A distortion. Someone's clearly tampering with the system. Tampering? Another director cut in. The metadata shows it originated from your account. You're claiming forgery. Daniel tried to pivot, but his voice betrayed him. Look, Jake Wilson was a liability. He was unpredictable, old school. He didn't understand where we're headed. I made a tough call. And coincidentally, the chairwoman interrupted, your tough call aligns perfectly with the timing of fraudulent payments approved by your close associate, Mr. Wilcox. Convenient. Daniel's composure collapsed. His words spilled out faster, jagged, defensive. You're twisting this. I was protecting the company, modernizing. Jake Wilson would have slowed us down. There it was again. My name. Spoken not as loyalty, not as contribution, but as obstruction. As something to be eliminated. For 17 years I had carried their systems on my back, and here he was, spitting my name out like a curse. I almost pitied him. Almost. Because at 10:42, the final slide cued itself, a pie chart of budget reallocations showing Daniel's department receiving consistent increases at the exact intervals Apex invoices spiked. The board didn't even have to ask the question. The evidence answered for him. Daniel's legacy as a visionary leader was gone. All that remained was a man cornered, his ambition unmasked as complicity. The boardroom had become a crime scene without police tape. Wilcox was sweating through his shirt, Vanessa's hands trembled as she clutched her notes, and Daniel, the great architect of progress, looked like a man watching his empire dissolve grain by grain. And me. For weeks, I had been a ghost. An unseen hand guiding every leak, every reveal, every perfectly timed email that surfaced at the moment of maximum impact. But ghosts don't get credit. Ghosts don't get remembered. It was time to stop being a shadow. At exactly 11 a.m., the projector feed froze. The documents, charts, and emails vanished. In their place, a single line appeared in stark black text on a white background. My name is Jake Wilson. I built the systems you're running this meeting on. And I built the evidence you're now choking on. Gasps cut through the boardroom like shattered glass. Vanessa clapped her hand over her mouth. Wilcox muttered something under his breath. Daniel went pale, the blood draining from his face. The board chair leaned forward, her voice sharp. Mr. Wilson, are you on this call? A beat of silence. Then I spoke, my voice pouring through the speakers, calm, steady, the voice of a man who no longer had anything to lose. I've been listening. For 17 years, I kept your company alive in the dark, patching holes, holding systems together with wire and grit while you handed out promotions to frauds. You discarded me when I became inconvenient. That was your mistake. Because I know where the bodies are buried. I dug the graves. Daniel shot to his feet, his voice cracking. This is illegal. This is sabotage. Cut the feed, now. But nobody moved. Not the IT support. Not the board. They were transfixed. You wanted modernization. I continued. I modernized accountability. Every email you buried, every invoice you falsified, every memo you signed, I've archived it. You can shut off this projector, but you can't shut off the truth. The board has copies. Regulators have copies. Journalists have copies. Wilcox's breathing turned ragged. Vanessa whispered, "Oh my God," under her breath. And Daniel. He looked around the room, suddenly small, realizing the walls were closing in. The empire he built on betrayal was crumbling in real time. I let the silence stretch, savoring it, before delivering the knife twist. This is no longer about my job. This is about yours. All of yours. And trust me, I don't intend to lose twice. The screen went black. And for the first time in their careers, they weren't in control. The room sat in stunned silence after my voice vanished. The weight of what I'd dropped didn't need echoes, it carried itself. Daniel broke first. He slammed his palm against the table, trying to resurrect authority. This is absurd. You're entertaining the ramblings of a bitter ex-employee. He's manipulating you. But the board chair cut him off with a single raised hand. Enough, Daniel. The words hit like a gavel. Wilcox shifted uncomfortably, his collar damp, his pen tapping against the pad he hadn't written on for minutes. Vanessa stared down at her notes, the edges of the paper crumpled where her fingers dug in. The finance chair leaned in. Brian, every Apex payment you authorized now carries the stench of fraud. You are suspended effective immediately. Wilcox opened his mouth, closed it again. His entire identity had been built on numbers, but now the math was devouring him. Vanessa, the HR oversight director said next, her voice sharp, precise, like a surgeon's scalpel. Your memo recommending Wilson's termination for exposure is a liability bomb. HR is supposed to protect this company from ethical breaches, not bury them. Consider yourself on administrative leave pending investigation. Vanessa's composure cracked. You don't understand, Daniel told me. Save it, the director snapped. We'll get your statement in writing. All eyes turned to Daniel. The once untouchable leader. The man who had made careers, crushed others, and sold the board his dream of a modern empire. The chairwoman's voice was cold, final. Daniel. We trusted your judgment. We invested millions in your vision. But it appears that vision was built on deception, collusion, and concealment. Effective immediately, you are relieved of your duties as CEO. The words fell like a hammer. Daniel staggered back, his face blanching. You can't, this company needs me. Jake Wilson is manipulating you. His nothing without us. But the board wasn't looking at him anymore. His power was gone. One by one, his allies were stripped of their titles, their defenses unraveling under the weight of evidence. And me. Sitting behind the feed, listening as the empire collapsed brick by brick, I felt the first real breath of vindication in years. For the first time, I wasn't the man in the corner, unseen, unheard. I was the one pulling the levers. The inner circle had fallen. But this was only the prelude. Because collapse wasn't enough. I wanted legacy. And that meant finishing what I started. The boardroom purge was just the ignition spark. The real fire began when the doors opened. By noon, news of Daniel's removal had leaked, whispered from one executive assistant to another, rippling down hallways, breaking into the open like cracks spreading through glass. By the end of the day, half the office knew. By morning, the city did. Headlines hit the business wires first. Meridian CEO resigns amid fraud probe. CFO, HR director suspended pending investigation. The story moved fast. Too fast for Daniel's lawyers to spin, too fast for PR to bury. Journalists smelled blood, and I had fed them the trail. Stock prices wavered, analysts called for restructuring, and employees who had once whispered in fear now spoke openly, their voices sharper, freer. In break rooms and elevators, I was no longer a ghost. I was a name carried on their lips, spoken in tones of disbelief and admiration. Did you hear? Wilson was right. He's the one who exposed them. They tried to bury him, and he buried them instead. Vanessa tried to reach out, I heard, emails to old allies, desperate attempts to frame herself as a victim of Daniel's schemes. But her memo had gone viral internally. The words immediate termination were now stamped on her career like a brand. Wilcox disappeared into silence, his once confident stride reduced to whispers about subpoenas and forensic audits. The man who had spoken in numbers now had none left to protect him. And Daniel. Daniel was fighting for his life in the only arena he understood, power. He hired crisis managers, attorneys, PR spin doctors. He went on record claiming betrayal, sabotage, a vendetta by a disgruntled employee. But for every sentence he uttered, another email surfaced. Another contract. Another smoking gun. Because I had set the release schedule in motion weeks earlier. Every morning, at 9 a.m., another drop would hit. Just enough to keep the storm alive. Just enough to keep him drowning. This wasn't just about exposure anymore. This was about rhythm. About narrative. About making sure every day, the world remembered his name in disgrace, and mine in justice. The fallout was total. And it was only beginning. Cornered animals don't go quietly. Daniel was no different. 2 weeks after his downfall, while Wilcox was busy feeding investigators half-truths and Vanessa was vanishing into silence, Daniel resurfaced. Not in the boardroom. Not in court. In the press. A polished interview dropped on a major business network. Daniel in a dark suit, tie perfectly knotted, the same calm authority that once convinced a board to trust him with millions. Meridian has been my life's work, he said, voice low, grave. What we're seeing is not corruption. It's sabotage. A coordinated smear campaign orchestrated by a disgruntled employee with a vendetta. Jake Wilson is not a whistleblower. He is a hacker, a manipulator, and a bitter man with nothing to lose. My name hung in the air like smoke. For a moment, I almost admired it. The man had been stripped of his crown, yet he still wielded words like weapons. If the world believed him, he could twist the story, reclaim the narrative, maybe even salvage a shadow of power. But Daniel didn't understand one thing. This wasn't a battle of spin anymore. It was a battle of proof. That same evening, while his interview trended online, the next scheduled release detonated across every news outlet, social feed, and whistleblower forum. A recorded phone call. Daniel's voice, unmistakable, sharp with frustration. If Wilson digs too deep, we'll cut him loose before Q2. Vanessa will handle the paperwork. Wilcox will bury the numbers. He'll never see daylight again. It played on loop across the networks within hours of his interview airing. The timing was surgical. Every word he spoke about me being a liar was drowned by his own voice proving otherwise. Reporters swarmed. Politicians called for inquiries. The board issued a statement severing all ties with him permanently. Daniel's last move had turned into his execution. I didn't need to answer him. He'd answered himself. For 17 years, I had been invisible. But now the whole world was watching him burn, and they knew exactly who lit the match. The storm had raged for weeks. Daniel's empire lay in ruins, Wilcox was a name whispered in auditor reports, and Vanessa's reputation had evaporated into dust. But revenge isn't complete until silence follows. Until the world stops asking if justice will come and begins accepting that it already has. That silence came one grey morning when the front page of the Wall Street Journal carried the headline. Former Meridian executives face federal indictments. Fraud. Conspiracy. Obstruction. Words that once lived in rumor now etched themselves into history. Their legacies reduced to docket numbers. I sat at my kitchen table, coffee cooling beside me, reading every line slowly. Not savoring, confirming. The work was finished. For 17 years, they had controlled the narrative. I was the dinosaur, the liability, the risk. They stripped me of dignity and buried my warnings under their ambition. But now their ambition was their obituary. And my silence was their eulogy. I didn't need applause. Didn't need a promotion, or even reinstatement. My revenge wasn't about reclaiming a seat at their table. It was about flipping the table, shattering it, and leaving the pieces for them to crawl over. The calls came, journalists wanting comment, employees sending thanks, old colleagues whispering admiration. I answered none of them. I let the story stand on its own. Because ghosts don't linger for applause. I had haunted them long enough. The files were closed. The schedule of releases shut down. For the first time in years, I powered off the machine. And as the screen went dark, I smiled. Not because I won. But because they lost, exactly the way they had tried to make me lose. The perfect ending.